Please share your views on the various public transit projects that are under consideration. The high-speed rail from Milwaukee to Madison, which would also connect us with the rest of the Midwest by high-speed rail, and the Kenosha, Racine, Milwaukee, KRM commuter rail project. Particularly, we'd like to know, what is your view of the regional transit authorities that have been proposed, or a variation on them?
I think when it comes to transportation, the question I always go to is how much does it cost and who's going to pay for it? So when I look at the rail from Madison to Milwaukee or Milwaukee to Madison, the first question I ask is, who's going to pay for it? And the federal government has said they would like to supply us with $810 million. Folks, the federal government is broke. They're spending almost $2 out of their checkbook for every $100 they have in their checkbook. And there's not a single business owner sitting out there today that would look at their checkbook and see $100 in it and then write out a $200 check thinking they could get away with that. And that's what's happening at the federal government today. So I start with the fact the government does not have the $810 million that they want to spend. The second point I would make is that even if they had that money, what we should be doing if they had, and they wanted to send it to Wisconsin, what we should do is cut taxes with that $810 million, because if we cut taxes, you all keep more of your own money. And I'm back to the same thing. This is Econ 101. If you keep more of your own money, you're either going to spend it and that's going to create jobs and economic growth and development, or you're going to save it and it's become the capital that our businesses need to grow and expand. So they don't have the money. If they had the money, we ought to use it for tax cuts. All of this discussion, when you go to the fact, even if they have the money, and even if they got the thing built, there are likely to be cost overruns. We saw yesterday, for example, they're now expecting a $10 million cost overrun. That means more tax burden on the people here in the state of Wisconsin. Long-term, cost of operation is a problem. When you ask me about rail-type transportation, I'll stay there to start with. Folks, I am not opposed to rail, and I'm not opposed to that as a means of transportation. I'm opposed to taxpayers that are not using the rail being asked to pay for that rail. A taxpayer in Superior should not be paying for a train between Milwaukee and Madison. And it's on that basis that I would oppose it as opposed to the type of transportation. As far as infrastructure, roads, bridges, we need to get refocused. Folks, we have a problem. That bridge closed in Milwaukee here a while ago. We need to check around the state and make sure we're not going to have that problem elsewhere, because if there's any way to drive a business out of Wisconsin, it's to have their truckload of materials going to or from market and have it not be able to get through a bridge because it's closed because we haven't maintained our infrastructure. So I view infrastructure, roads, bridges, the maintenance of our highways, I would view that as a very, very high priority in the administration. And when I cap across the board these spending increases at 1% less than the rate of inflation, it may be an area where we actually look at and say we may need more spending in that particular area by reducing someplace else that is less important. So again, if you're going to increase anywhere, you've got to offset someplace else. It's a business concept, again, that we would bring to the office. So I support infrastructure, roads, bridges. I think it's very, very important in terms of attracting jobs to the state of Wisconsin. On rail, I have no problem with rail as a means of transportation and would certainly support it, but I always want to know how it's going to be paid for, and I don't want that burden passed to the taxpayers of our state as opposed to the people that benefit by the use. Thank you.
Well, as I mentioned a number of times in our 6 points, transportation is certainly a key component of that. As I look at that, and again, go back to past performance as county executive just up the way in Milwaukee County, I've highlighted in my county, although it directly affects Kenosha and Racine as well, that I believe that the entire freeway system in southeastern Wisconsin in particular needed to be updated to deal with the capacity needs we have in this part of the state and really statewide. And so that means in the past I've advocated for both the east-west corridor, which includes where the zoo interchange is at in Milwaukee County near Wauwatosa where I live, as well as the north-south corridor being expanded to deal with the capacity needs we have here. And again, in Kenosha County, you know that all too well, that as we look at commerce and products and production coming through this area, having an adequate freeway system right now, even today, at certain times of the day, there's quite heavy congestion in that area. We need to make sure that that corridor is expanded, as is the east-west corridor from Milwaukee all the way through Madison. There are examples like that all across the state, and that's why I've spoken out early and often about the $810 million that Governor Doyle and Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett want to spend on the so-called high-speed rail line between Milwaukee and Madison. I mean, if you look at the federal estimates, it says it'll create ultimately permanently 55 jobs. $14.5 million is a lot to spend on one job. I think both Mark and I could do a lot more with $14.5 million than just create one job. I'd like to see, through an act of Congress, that money be reprogrammed so that We can spend that on the roads and bridges that need help in the state today, where we have an identified need for 2 of the corridors I mentioned and others across the state of Wisconsin. We did it once before in 1998. Governor Tommy Thompson got the Congress to reprogram a portion of the remaining $241 million at that time so that it was spent on a number of key road projects. That is probably one of the biggest differences in this race, not between Mark and I, but between us and Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett. You saw just yesterday, he used his portion of that $91.5 million and added on some, once even more from the federal government, if you can believe it or not, to do a streetcar system that addresses just a few miles in downtown Milwaukee. That should tell you what's going to happen if he's the governor. A lot of money being spent on rail in Milwaukee and not a lot spent on roads and bridges around the rest of the state of Wisconsin. I think that's fundamentally important to remember. And I like regional cooperation when it comes to transportation, but to me an RTA should be about regional transportation. It shouldn't be a regional taxing authority. And unfortunately, in the past, when we've had this discussion with regional leaders here, my focus has been on transportation and not on taxing.